you guys noticed any difference with lifting before jiu-jitsu or lifting before running? What do you guys prescribe to? What do you think? Like, or running first, or I don't know. What do you guys think?
General perspective from our end is, unless the lifting is entirely to support another sport, then the lifting should always be prioritized in the context of a day, because the degradation that comes from the fatigue of endurance training translated into lifting is significantly more than the other way around. Because if you think of running as effectively, again, let's talk within the context of heavier people with a lifting background here. If you're a heavier runner, every stride
is a repetition.
It's a repetition, yeah. And if you're doing loads and loads of repetition. Imagine if you went the other way around to conventional lifting and you did a set of 100 at 60 kilos before you went and did your top single. That makes no sense.
Agreed.
So it's the same premise in reverse, whereby the quality emphasis that comes with the lower rep demand of lifting means that we would always recommend prioritizing that, with the caveat being, two caveats actually. The caveat being, unless the lifting is only there to support the priority sport of the person, in which case it's pure S&C that's there to support the endurance training, or within the context of somebody's week, from a practicality point of view, they can't lift first thing and they need to do their endurance training, because doing the training first and foremost is more important than worrying too much about the interference effect, which is something that has seemed to become a bit of a scapegoat as a phrase and a word online that people just throw out there to just justify
being lazy.
Yeah, well, and sometimes there's like some legitimacy to it. For example, and
it's an entirely legitimate thing.
You can also get a training benefit from it. But just as an example, so like a snatch it's a skillful lift, right?
Yeah.
It's something that we can agree like has a level of skill involved with it. And if you were to do, bang out a bunch of push-ups and body weight squats beforehand, it would quote unquote retard your ability to perform the snatch well. Same thing with, you wouldn't really lift or ride a bike necessarily, stationary bike for 30 minutes and do intervals and stuff like that before you did gymnastics. Like gymnastics is too high skill. However, when people do stuff like this, it disproves what we thought previously every single fucking time. So while it might mess up your coordination, and it might, let's even just say before you bench press, you do push-ups. Let's say you do 150 push-ups before you bench press every week. Over a period of time, there might be an adaptation that occurs where when you go back to regular bench pressing and you nix the push-ups, you might be stronger. So we see a lot of this stuff, but I think that that's where most people are coming from, is like they don't want it to mess up maybe the skill. And I was just, curious on what your guys' take on some of these things are.
I think the previous misconception with the interference effect is a thing. It's entirely legitimate. It exists. But I think the conventional understanding has been it's an on and an off switch, where it blunts mTOR or downregulates AMPK, and it means that therefore no adaptation can occur. And that simply isn't the case. I mean, if you look at the way that CrossFit Games athletes' training is put together, it just doesn't in any way lend itself to those that are shouting the loudest about the interference effect, because they put things together in a way that is getting the volume that they need to do within the context of the week done. And whilst, yes, it means that maybe they haven't adapted as much as they would have done had they done that training session in isolation, they're still moving the needle forward slowly but surely. And I mean, the interference effect came from a study that effectively, the idea came from, there was a researcher who was a powerlifter, and he wanted to impress his research manager, who was Professor Holosi, who was a runner. So he started going on runs around the campus with him just to sort of get close to him and work his way up the corporate ladder of the academic setting. And he found that he was getting weaker. He was getting smaller and he was getting weaker because he wasn't taking certain things into account. And that made him fascinated about why this was the case. He had a discussion with Holosi, his research manager, and his first research exploration was in exactly this. And there were three groups. So there was A, B, and C. A was doing basically squatting and leg pressing 5x5 focus. B was doing running focus, sort of a 30-minute, 40-minute hard effort run twice a week. And then C was doing both. So they were doing 100% of A and 100% of B, and they were doing that together. And then they found that the sort of point where fatigue really started to hit a point where numbers dropped was week 7. And that's where the findings of the study said interference occurred, And this is where all the research on the interference effect has since come from. But if you actually look at the context of the study, yes, it's opened up some fantastic questions and allows us to figure these things out for ourselves, as well as opening up new studies since there's a meta-analysis. But the way the study was put together is the exact mistake that most people make when trying to do this for the first time, which is they take 100% of a running program, 100% of a lifting program, and go like that. And then suddenly wonder why after 2 weeks at 200% output, they're feeling beaten up.
And sometimes also, what about just convenience?
That's it, yeah.
You know, and
that's
the convenience, you know, goes into compliance. And if you can have the convenience to keep the compliance, then that's probably the best thing for you to do.
That's why the second caveat I gave is if somebody's work schedule means that they can't lift before they go to the track, then that's the case.
The most important thing.
A sustainable athlete is the better athlete.
That's where you got to start with most people.
Yeah, if you can't get to training, but also not just that. It's like a lot of the guys, like our system was developed with primarily tactical athletes and combat athletes, so people who fight, right? So going back, that skill acquisition, when that's a priority, not too different with any sport, you want to do like same thing. We want to lift before we do our long endurance training, right? But the reason will be different. Like the technical, that blade, my point being, that blade cuts both ways. So yes, if you want to prioritize your skill training, you want to prioritize your skill training. You don't want to burn yourself out before you come into the gym by running 50 miles and then coming in for your deadlift day, right? However, you have to look kind of the other way too, that it's like, well, in a real life situation, am I always going to be perfectly rested and prepared for this? Or should maybe my body be used to operate, like specifically with the martial arts stuff or with the firearms training? So we do introduce some deliberate fatigue, of specific energy systems for those same situations. But yeah, generally speaking, we're doing the exact same thing, and for different, subtly different flavors, but we found the same results as well. And the big question is how much are you doing it? The only other thing I would add is the dynamics change, and you can do quite a bit more if you can. Not all athletes can do this, but if you can get schedule wise and physiology wise, you can get them to take a nap. And 30 minute nap, even up to 60-minute nap, and a small meal, carbohydrates and electrolytes in that training window between those two. And this is talking about the AMPK and mTOR relationship, and that they've seen it in the same studies that analyze both, that showing the introduction of glycogen, replenishing after an AMPK heavy workout, prepares, et cetera, et cetera. But everyone wants it to be all or nothing. They want it to be a switch that, you can't run and lift, you can't do that. And it's like, dude, it's a nuanced thing. This is physiology. How much, when, how are you doing this? How are you organizing this? How are you recovering from this? So,
it could even change within a week, right? Like one day you could lift and you can run after,
for sure.
And the next day you could switch it if you needed to or wanted to, or just like doing that.
Yeah.
And people train for enjoyment. So
yeah.
Fucking stop wasting so much time arguing about this on the internet and get training. That's kind of where I always come to this conclusion when I get drawn into this conversation too much online.
Yeah, I'm with you.
It goes back to, can't remember whether it was this podcast or the previous one. I think spending so much time trying to find the perfect training program that's perfectly in line with the science and ticks all these boxes won't happen, because science is so variable and ever changing. But the basic principles that underpin it are largely irrefutable. So if you just get to work and figure it out as you go, build the wings as you fly, and then take the lessons and adjust them over time, you will have more context on yourself and the individual athlete, if you're on a coaching capacity, on how the knowledge that is out there applies to that individual context. But training is trial and error. Mm-hmm. Training is trial and error within an imperfect ecosystem. People have jobs, people have kids, people eat different food. Yeah. Things are within context that need to be borne in mind. And I think there's so much time wasted on looking at things in isolation when those things in isolation are so massively affected by the external stresses that need to be considered as well.
Yeah. You see so many people stressing all of their energy on that last 1 to 5% when they haven't nailed the first 95 to 99.
Recovery is the buzzword that really has lost its meaning in that sense, because if you're doing too much training in the first place, the very expensive recovery metric that can save you 1 percentage point isn't going to be the thing that brings you back from the proverbial dead. No. So ice baths are fantastic. Massage guns can have their place once you've got the basics nailed. It's a pyramid.
Agreed.
And in building recovery and recoverable volume into programming, I think, is the pillar that really people should focus on a little.